Okay, so we're continuing with the rest of the skull. This is an inferior view of the skull, and this is the palatine bone here, which is making the hard palate. And if you move down a little bit here, you'll see this is the nasal septum. This is the bony nasal septum, and this is the vomer, which is the inferior part of it. And this is the medial pterygoid plate. This is the lateral pterygoid plate, and this is the pterygoid fossa down here. And then we have the mastoid process, we have the styloid process, and this, if we remove this, this is going to be the mandibular fossa for articulation with the head of the mandible or the head of the condylar process of the mandible. And now we're going to do the foramina. Always start with the largest of all, which is the foramen magnum. Magnum means large, huge. This is foramen magnum. If you move a little bit, like here, this is the hypoglossal foramen for the hypoglossal nerve. And if you move a little bit more lateral, it is a hypoglossal again in another view, but this is the jugular foramen down here, jugular foramen. Then if you move from the foramen magnum and go anteriorly, still in the middle line, the closest foramen to the middle line is called foramen lacerum, and it's called lacerum because if anything go through it, it will be lacerated, and this is where the name came from, foramen lacerum. If you move laterally from foramen lacerum, you're going to see an oval foramen down here, which is foramen ovale, and then a very tiny one over here, which is the spinous process. Looks like a spine going through it, very tiny. So ovale or oval, and this is spinosum. And this one here, it's not actually a foramen. If you go through it, it's a canal, and this is a carotid canal. Carotid canal for the passage of the internal carotid artery. The jugular foramen for the jugular vein. The hypoglossal is for the hypoglossal nerve, which is nerve number 12. And the foramen magnum is for the spinal cord to go through, and also for the vertebral arteries to go up, and for the accessory nerve, the spinal cord, to go up. So this is the entrance for all these structures down here. If we are going to open the skull and look inside, if you look here, you can see an anterior, middle, and posterior cranial fossa. If you start with the anterior cranial fossa, this is the cribriform plate of ethmoid, and this is for the passage of the fibers of the olfactory nerve. This part here is the cresta galli. Cresta means crest or an elevation. Galli means roster. So this is like the roster's crest or galli or something. So this is cresta galli down here. And if you move back to this part down here, the whole bone here is called the sphenoid bone. This is the greater wing of sphenoid. Lesser wing, I'm sorry, this is the lesser wing of sphenoid, and this is the greater wing of sphenoid. So we have two wings, lesser and greater at this part here. This is called the sella turcica. This is what's housing the pituitary or the hypophyseal gland. So the pituitary gland is at this point here. And if you move to the posterior here, you will see all these foramen magnum and other foramina. But I want to point out to this part down here, which is the internal occipital protuberance, because we said this is external occipital protuberance, so this is the internal occipital protuberance down here. Now if we're going to do the foramina, again we're going to start from the foramen magnum here, which is only one, and then if you come a little bit closer here, you can see the hypoglossal foramen for the hypoglossal nerve, and then you have the jugular, which is the jugular foramen down here, and then this bone is called the petrous bone. This part of the temporal bone, and so it's petrous temporal, and you can see this foramen here, which is the internal acoustic meatus, which is the other end of the external acoustic meatus. So this is external, and this is internal on the petrous bone. Now, so that's what we have on the posterior cranial fossa. You have the foramen magnum, you have the hypoglossal, you have the jugular, and then you have the internal acoustic meatus. If you move back to the middle, you can see the following foramina, and you can actually call it O, S, R, O, S, C. So O, S, R, O, S, C. O is the optic, which is the optic foramen and optic canal for the passage of the optic nerve. And then the next one, if we can come closer to this is a slit-like opening. So this is called fissure, and this is the superior orbital fissure. And this is actually, if you look at it from the other side, here is superior orbital fissure right here. So you're just looking at it from the inside view. Here it is. So this is superior orbital fissure, and this is the S. Then this is foramen rotundum, and then which means the round foramen, and this is foramen ovale, looks like an oval, and this is a very tiny one, which is the spinosum, looks like a spine going through it. So this is foramen spinosum, and the last one in this side here, which is the other opening for the carotid canal. So O for optic, S for superior orbital fissure, R for rotundum, O for ovale, S for spinosum, and C down here for the carotid. And this one, the closest to the metal line on either side of the sola turcica, this is actually foramen lacerum. And that's it for this part.